Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Smart Investor Singapore. It's the 19th of December and we have our regular Monday guest, Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy, calling in from Singapore at Mizuho Bank. Now, Vishnu, as always, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's always good to start the day having a chat with you about markets.
Now, Vishnu, it's the final 2 weeks of the year. Traditionally, fund managers are basically already on holiday. Markets are very, very quiet, but that is not quite the case this year because there are increased concerns around recessions across the globe. Give us some of your insights into what's the conversations that are going around in the investor community right now.
Well, I think to start off, markets were quite happy to try to latch on to the entire idea that the Fed should be hitting peak rates soon and perhaps potentially pivoting, the latter part of next year. And so on that premise, given that we've had such a bad year, markets were all gearing up to grasp at anything to conjure up a center rally and perhaps would have taken profits towards the end of the year. However, last week's rash of central bank meetings had the Fed reiterating its hawkish positioning, saying that they're not backing down from hikes. Markets didn't want to take their word for it, but when the ECB chimed in, saying that despite lowering to 50 basis points from 75 basis points, they expressly said, markets would be mistaken to perceive this as a pivot. So that hawkish jolt probably sent markets to do some soul searching around the fact that rates will probably be higher for longer on a sustained hawkishness. And that uncomfortably puts them in a place where they need to think about, mounting recession risks, especially as we get into the middle of next year. And it's this, this soul searching or in a sense, this realization that's hard to ignore that had markets capitulating somewhat. So the elephant in the room has become harder to ignore, even as markets look at trying to make the best of it and call it a year. And I think coincidentally, what has also happened over the weekend is despite very positive policy directions from China, one of the things that markets are also trying to calibrate right now is to reassess whether they've gotten too optimistic about imminent and a huge impact from China's reopening, because clearly in the first stage, it appears that the infections are also starting to surge as China reopens. So they probably need to deal with the fact that this is going to be a bumpy ride out of COVID and not a big bang type of economic stimulus. So those things are what markets are contending with.
Now, Vishnu, looking ahead to this week, what are some key events and data points that could be coming out this week that could move markets?
I think markets are mostly done with a huge number of central bank meetings last week with the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of England, the Swiss National Bank, the Norges Bank, so on and so forth. They'll be watching BOJ this week. Tomorrow, the BOJ announces its decision. But there, I don't think a big surprise is anticipated first. The BOJ is expected to hold on to its dovish stance and policy accommodation. No surprises there. But as much as it's not a surprise, it's also inconsequential. I think that doesn't distract markets from the fact that the major central banks outside of the BOJ are all going to continue to lift rates. So that reckoning with higher for longer rates, that narrative doesn't change with the BOJ meeting this week. We will probably have diminished attention to data points coming out after that as we get into the rest of the year. And as you rightly pointed out, markets call it a day and wrap up. Nevertheless, I think early this week there could be some digesting of the Central Economic Working Committee conference that went on in China, because there's been a lot of a pro-growth stance taken in there, and there's been an allusion to both quantity and quality of growth, which means to say that China will probably be trying to target a 5% type of growth for next year. Markets may then have to sit down and reassess. I think there's a lot of positives there, from support for the tech platform companies right up to boosting consumption demand. But embedded in there are also questions about how how much consumption can be boosted as the economy comes out of COVID, and as well as the counterbalance of financial stability and ensuring that housing is for living, not for speculation, which means you're not going to get a boomtown kind of effect from the property market. You're just going to get a backstop. And so these will give markets a little bit to chew on as they wrap up the year.
Now, Vishnu, as always, thank you very much for your insights, and thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure as always, Brian. Thanks for having me.
We've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Smart Investor Singapore. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video and podcast will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and website. Thanks a lot for tuning in.